Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Doctor to Doctor in the Chat Room. We are so delighted to have you guys back with us another Saturday to share this hour as we discuss relevant topics that impact our communities and our world. And as we always say, we are grateful to you for just taking a moment out of your Saturdays to come back and support us. We cannot do this without you. And we thank you so much because we know that you do not have to. We're gearing up for another great episode and a great discussion in the chat room. We have a very special guest who has been here with us before, and we are so glad to have him back, and you will hear from him momentarily. But in the meantime, let me just say, as we always do, guys, be careful as we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and just, the new variants are coming on the scene. So we want you guys to be careful. I know we've been on lockdown for a long time, and we're in the holiday season, and you want to enjoy your family and your friends. And we want you to do that, but we just want you to use those necessary precautions to stay safe, as in, wearing your mask and physically distancing yourselves when you can. And if you can't, just do those things that you know you need to do to stay safe. Wash your hands and, put your mask on. And if you don't want to get vaccinated, I mean, I don't, I won't say that I don't encourage people to, because I do encourage people that can get vaccinated to get vaccinated. But if that's not your thing, it's a very small price to pay to put a mask on to save a life. So at least be willing to do that. I have co-host Dr. Nicole West in the chat room. How are you, Dr. West?
I'm doing well today. I'm really excited about this topic and to have Dr. Arnold back. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And he has taken time out of a very, very busy schedule and a very, very eventful life to come back and share this hour with us. And actually, we're having like a part one and a part two because of this particular topic that we're going to talk about today. And as we bring our guest on and he shares his story with you guys again, you will understand why we are talking about reentry after incarceration. According to the Department of Justice, the incarceration rate in the U.S., including state and federal prisons and local jails, it was 537 people behind bars per 100,000 residents in early 2021. Research has shown that people, particularly fathers, returning to their families and communities after incarceration often face multiple challenges, including the lack of housing or employment, large child support debts, complicated family relationships or otherwise. These folks may also need emotional support, love and care, and other forms of guidance. And we want to talk about after incarceration, what's next? What's next and what it looks like. Hello, Dr. William Arnold. How are you today?
I'm well, Dr. Rhonda Shaw. How are you?
He's so funny. I'm doing well. I don't know what it is about Arnold that's so hard for me to say. I got that little speech impediment thing going on, so I had to take my time so I wouldn't mess it up. That's all. We're glad to have you, and we thank you really for sacrificing your time to come and talk with us, because we really do feel like this is an important, and I know you do too, this is a really important topic. And so we just want to ask that you reshare with the audience, a little bit about you, who you are, and a little bit about your story, if you would just start with that.
Sure. Well, I'm a native Memphian. As I always like to tell folks, I'm a proud product of the Memphis City school system. After graduating from high school, I attended the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And after I graduated from there in 1995, I moved to Nashville, where I pursued a career in higher education. I worked for the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, Tennessee State University, Tennessee Board of Regents. and also did graduate work in higher education at Tennessee State University. So my life has pretty much existed up and down Interstate 40 back and forth. But then in 2013, it took an odd turn that took me off Interstate 40 when I was wrongfully convicted of crimes I didn't commit. I was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As a result, I spent 6 years and 9 months in the state penitentiary. So after spending 6 years and 9 months in the state penitentiary, my case was overturned on post-conviction appeal in February of 2020. And then in April of 2020, I was released. And so I came home in the midst of in the height of the pandemic as a different person in a totally different world. And since that time, I've been going through what is called reentry, which is the transition from incarceration, which is life in prison or jail, or for young people, juvenile justice facilities, to life in the community. And so if you think about it, you go from an experience where someone controlled every minute of your day and it was regulated by outside entities that you can't control. So all of a sudden being able to wake up and jump in the car when you want to, or go outside and see the sunset or the sunrise. So it's a big change. It may not sound like much, but it's a real big change to go from a war zone to a place of peace in less than 24 hours, and just try and find your place in that space. So that's what the last 19 months or so have been like for me.
When you were here last time, you gave us a couple of examples of, you know, the new things that were on the scene when you were released from prison. Give us a couple of those examples, because I think that was the first time it really hit me. Like, man, this is really
Right.
amazing how life can change like overnight for someone, right? You know, we're just going through our normal days, our normal months and years, and we are gradually evolving as the world evolves. And then you got somebody over here where life is totally stagnated.
Yeah. So what you have to first realize is that when you are incarcerated, your access to information, the technology are limited. There are no cell phones. There is no internet, right? And the telephone that we actually use is literally a phone up on the wall with a cord on it. Something that we probably not seen since probably the 90s, not a whole lot in the 21st century. So when I went away in 2013, smartphones had just been on the scene for about 2 years. And so coming home and seeing how everyone is so obsessed with their phones, and just sitting in a restaurant and seeing two people not even talk to each other because they're both on their phones, or they're so absorbed in what's going on their phones, was odd to me. Because in prison, your conversations are face to face, or as I said, they're on the telephone, but you're listening to the person. You're actually having a conversation. There's dialogue, there are questions, answers, et cetera. So to see how people just interact as it relates to how cell phones and even tablets have become the norm. Seeing how now, as I re-enter the workforce, how my phone controls and regulates my life. If it's not in my phone, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or even worse, if I lose my phone, I've essentially lost my mind. So to see how much technology has changed and how we really rely on the instantaneous of things. Words like selfie. The word selfie is, I think I may have told you, didn't exist when I went away. When I left in 2013, Barack Obama had just started his second presidency, or at least his second term. So when you think of all the things that happened during his term that I missed, I watched Black Lives Matter and Ferguson and the South Carolina shootings, these real powerful turning points in American history. I watched them unfold on television. I was watching football the other night and realized that big stars like OBJ, as they call him, or even a couple of basketball players. Pretty much their whole careers have all happened in the last 7 years, and they've become these big stars. But I watched it all from prison. Ones that are, Blackish, the TV show, How to Get Away with Murder. They, Blackish spawned what, Mixedish, Grownish, and now Oldish, I think it is. So you think how that whole franchise has been something I was able to only make sense of as a prisoner, so to speak. So when I think of folks who are doing 10, 15, 20, 25 calendars, if you will, that's what we call them on this side is calendars. To re-enter society after 15, 20, 25 years without a starting point, at least a baseline knowledge of technology. Can you imagine what that's like? When you spoke to a gentleman who had done 21 years, and he was telling me, Doc, when I got out, I was looking for a payphone. I couldn't find one.
Wow.
So when you think about folks who missed the evolution of the cell phone, who missed just the fact that landline is not a normal thing, it's a whole different world. And when you've been free all that time and you've watched technology pass, you never think about it because it's that natural progression of life. But to a person who didn't get the opportunity to have those real life experiences, there's just this big space that you're trying to make sense of, and how do we get from here to now here? And so thankfully, when I went away, I was a relatively high functioning adult, and I wouldn't say I was technologically savvy, but I knew how to use a smartphone and how to send an attachment on email. But now, streaming still is amazing to me. The fact that Bluetooth speakers work so well, or GPS really knows where I am. Those are some amazing things because, again, in 2013, that was not the norm. So really adjusting to how technology can make my life simpler if I understand and appreciate its usage has been perhaps one of the biggest adjustments for me since coming home.
Yeah, you even mentioned, that one of your friends made a vehicle available to you.
All right.
And how just not driving for that length of time was an oddity. Yeah. So I read another report from the Department of Justice that said something like 77% of released prisoners are rearrested within 5 years.
That is the unfortunate part of reentry is what's called recidivism. And recidivism is sort of it's the act of continuing to commit crimes after you've been punished. So you've got folks who have done some things they weren't supposed to, became involved with the justice system, may have gone on probation, parole, or to prison or jail. And then after they are released or they re-enter society, in Tennessee alone, the recidivism rate is 46%. So pretty much 1 out of 2 folks who go to prison or jail and come out are going to go back in the next 3 years. So it becomes this big puzzle, if you will, of how do we supply those individuals with the things that they need to keep them from recidivating. So how do we, is it about taking them away from whatever that element was? Is it about treating underlying conditions? Is it a mental health issue? Is it a substance abuse issue? What is it, that causes folks to continue to go back? And so often we don't treat the issue, we just treat the person less than human. And so you get that cycle, once you become, once you get used to being institutionalized, you get used to, this is the life that, and it's going to sound crazy, but this is the life God established for me. Some people just accept that and they don't want to do any better. And when they're presented with things to help them do better and allow them to reach that aha moment, they're stuck in that cycle. And it's an unfortunate cycle of spiraling down.
And I wonder too, if it's a scary moment for someone who, I could possibly do better, but what if I don't? Then what does that say about me? What if I fail again? Then I know that it's me, and not necessarily the system. or the environment that we live in. Tell me this. I know, I've watched a lot of Netflix and some shows about, people who have tried to re-enter society. And on TV, they show these scenes where they're getting out of jail and they might get, they get all the clothes that they came in with and their personal belongings, and then they get a few dollars to catch a cab or, and then they're supposed to somehow make this work for the rest of their life. Is that what it truly looks like when you leave prison? Do they don't give you anything besides what you came in there with, or do they help you get on your feet in any way?
All right, let's say this. First of all, as long as you're alive, don't believe anything you see on television about prison. All right, because it's either over or under dramatized.
Okay. I get that.
Much,
I totally get that because it's TV, right?
Yeah,
it's TV. So it's they're that's being done to get a check. Yes, they don't care much about reality. But when depending on how first of all, let's just talk about leaving prison. Okay, so when you leave prison, you can leave a couple of ways. You can leave on parole, which means that you were given a sentence. We'll say 25 years. And that sentence, you may have been told you have to serve 25 years. And I'm just going to throw a crazy number out there and say 30%. So you got to do 30% of that 25 years, which comes out to eight years, et cetera, et cetera. So you get out on parole. So that means that you are now able to be free to an extent, but you're still on paper or parole, as we call it. So you still have to answer to someone. You still have to live your life in a certain way. You still have the possibility of recidivating and going back to prison. So that's the first way. The second way is that your sentence has expired, or in the prison world, it's that you flatten your sentence. In other words, it's flat, it's gone, and now you give that back to the state of Tennessee. And with that, or you're in my case, your case is overturned, and therefore still flat. You don't have to answer to anyone. So those are the two different ways that you can actually leave prison, if you will, the two biggest ways. And I think we're about to take a moment, so I want to leave us there.
Yeah. And we're going to take a break in just a second. And then, you can come back and kind of spell that out for us, like the ways that you leave and what actually happens. And if people have more than just the bare minimal, what they had on their backs when they went in. And so y'all, we got our lesson here today. Stop believing what we see on TV, okay? You are listening to Doctor to Doctor in the Chat Room. We will be right back in a moment on 94.7 FM.
And we are back on Doctor to Doctor in the Chat Room. Thank you for sticking around with us. We have Dr. William Arnold with us today, and he...
See how slow she had to say that? See? It was not just me.
I was like, well, okay. Yeah, Dr. Arnold. There we go. We're talking about all things, talking a little bit about recidivism and reentry. And before the break, you were telling us about the ways that you leave prison, because, I watch Netflix and all these shows kind of make it a little bit, not necessarily glamorous, but I was watching something the other day. She got all of her belongings, and I think she even got like $50, which is really nothing when you think about it. Like, you're supposed to go out and, live the rest of your life, find a place to live, eat, don't do any crime. $50. I mean, I spent that on dinner a couple nights ago. So tell us a little bit about, how that truly looks. You were explaining before the break.
Sure. So I think I mentioned there were two big ways, so to speak, that you get out of prison. And that is either through parole or through flattening your sentence being done, your case being overturned. And then there's that third way, which is you actually die in prison. And, unfortunately, I saw a number of people get out of prison that way, some by natural causes, some by the environment, and others because they took their own lives. So you see a lot of different things happen behind those walls that it can affect you mentally and emotionally, so that when you are re-entering society and you're returning to this sense of normalcy that you had just come from is so totally different. So, you're going through this culture shock, if you will, because now, as I say, you're re-entering society. Um, and you're trying to figure out, what's your place. Parole, because I'm not on parole, is a very challenging thing for a number of people. I
Mhm.
can recall being on the inside and talking to guys who were up for parole. And they were scared. They were scared because they knew their own selves. They knew their own weaknesses.
Yeah.
And those weaknesses could have been substance abuse. They could have been just going back to an old environment where you're going to get involved in the same things. I
Mhm.
had people say to me in prison, "Hey, man, I ain't no being on paper kind of dude," and they
Yeah.
would do things, unfortunately, to just remain in prison and let their sentences expire, so that way when they leave, they have a flat sentence. So that idea of parole, which is that get out early
Yeah.
option, because you've done this amount of time, you were eligible for it, you've gone before the parole board, they've decided to give you or to grant you parole, and then
Mhm.
you're back in society, but you are on paper and having to check in with someone, and having to be drug tested, having to have a regulated job, having to go by other provisions. But some folks just know, hey, I can't do that. And so for me, I couldn't, this is just, my editorial. I can't rationalize not being free. So I
Yeah.
couldn't make sense of it. But so that's why I say that we have to make certain that in reentry, we are treating whatever this person's lived experience is as caused the issue that
Right.
keeps putting them back in jail. And there is no fix all one shot thing for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone that goes through this process of being adjudicated, being released, however they're released, has to figure out what made them get adjudicated in the first place. Why did they get in trouble? And then why do they keep getting in trouble?
Uh-huh.
And you all, you've got all these letters behind your names. You know that it's pretty much understood the definition of insanity. It's
Uh-huh.
doing the same thing over and over again, expecting this different result. So how do we begin to address these issues, these core issues that are causing individuals to continue to do things that they know are going to result in them being in prison, which isn't a good place, which
Right.
isn't humanizing, which doesn't build any type of positive foundation. Then it also takes that person away from their community, away from their family, away from their jobs, away from their friends, and those people suffer and they become what's called collateral damage, because they
Uh-huh.
are essentially damaged because this person has been taken away from their life.
Uh-huh.
When you think about someone going to prison, it's often equated to death, because if you can think of the suddenness of someone just leaving and they're gone, you can still perhaps talk to them or write them, but their physical, actual presence in your day-to-day life has ended at that time. And so when you think of what it's like to lose someone, you think of the effects of that. Think of what that is like to a significant other.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Think of what that's like to a community. Think
Uh-huh.
of what's that like to a child to suddenly
Uh-huh.
lose a parent. And that's time you can never get back. Um, so it becomes a question of, if you know that this is whatever, you are the cause of that collateral damage to some degree because of what you continue to do that causes you to recidivate and to go back to prison. What can be done in that reentry space?
Mhm.
What can be done, better yet, before you even leave those walls, before you leave a prison or a jail? What can you start doing? What services, what preventive measures, what educational opportunities can be presented to a person to address those core issues, so that when you do leave that war zone, you do return to this society, this free world, that you are able to, as I say, move and groove in a way that is beneficial and positive for you, and also for your loved ones and your community. And so that is the big question of reentry, and that how do we begin to discuss reentry, and how do we begin to administer reentry in a way that rehumanizes people from having gone through the this dehumanizing experience, but also in a positive, strengthening way that we can address those core issues and that we're able to help them remove those mental and those emotional and those, to some degree, sociological barriers. Because because the next thing in reentry is that you've got those types of barriers that we can't see, but that we feel and that affect us. Then there are those artificial barriers that society tends to set up and to create that keeps folks from reentering. Most people who, when they leave jail or prison, don't have vital documents. So if you can imagine being an adult, you don't have a driver's license or a state ID. You don't have a social security card. You don't have a birth certificate. So and so I didn't start talking about things like shot records and, you know, other things that you're going to need, where if it's a job or it's housing or it's any type of service, you have to first be able to prove who you are. And those are some of the first artificial barriers. And I call them artificial because they're things that shouldn't be buried.
Right.
They're things that should be in place, if you will, because the prison or the jails understand that when these folks get out of here, they don't have that. So if we are going to try and enable this person to not come back here, why don't we have these things in place to make certain when they walk out this door, this is not going to be something they're going to have to worry about. Because 9 times out of 10, him or her have some issues in here and in here that they're struggling with, is going to keep them coming back here. So not having a driver's license or a state ID card to get a place to stay tonight, or a birth certificate or a social security card to be able to get a job that we're requiring them to have, shouldn't be an issue. So how do we become more conscious of the artificial barriers that we create? And how do we get rid of those things so that reentry can begin to be a smoother, more humanizing, palatable process? We're about to go to a break. I didn't know.
No. And as you were speaking, I thought about something. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we had a young man on to talk about domestic violence. And one of the things that we talked about was that safety plan when someone's trying to get out of a situation, right? And you've just kind of confirmed that even in this situation, everything's customized, right? Like, you know, what one person may need, another may need something polar opposite, although there may be some similar things, right? Housing and, you know, ID and all of that. But there are other things that are more customized to the individualized needs. And it just seems like, you know, no matter what the situation, whether we're educating people, whether we're helping people re-enter the society after being incarcerated, or whether we're talking about folks trying to get out of a domestic violence situation, you know, differentiated instruction and education. And, you know, we talk about that when it comes to education, and then how we have to customize what we do with everybody else too, you know. I mean, because we can't just say that every single person coming out of prison is going to need the same exact things.
Right.
There may be similar things, but not necessarily the same exact.
Yeah, that's key. You know, you can't just say, hey, everybody gets the same thing or everybody needs the same thing, because again, that lived experience, what caused them to get there.
There you go.
What the experience may have done to them, how it may have changed them can make a difference, because you don't know what trauma that person could have experienced. And I know we use the word trauma so much now in society, but being in an environment where violence can happen just like that, or that you can't get good health care. You know, I used to have this joke when I was in prison. I was like, no wonder my life is messed up. I live in a horrible neighborhood. Diet is terrible, and I get poor health care. So you know, think about how many people that's their reality in the free world right now out here. So when you're dealing with that reality out here, and then you have a desire to do better and you don't understand how to, and you go out and you do something that causes you to get to prison, now you are forced and compelled to be in an environment where you're in a bad neighborhood, where
Yeah.
your diet is horrible because of the food you receive, and because your health care is terrible because you have folks who are literally just checking a box and not really doing a lot of preventive care. Um, the top four issues, if you will, of when a person is released from prison that they have are employment, housing, transportation, mental health and recovery, and just a social support system.
Mhm.
My reentry, truly by the grace of God and the power of family and friends, didn't have so many barriers because, like I said in the last show, a friend of mine said, "Here, keep my truck until you don't need it anymore."
Mm-hmm.
I was then able to secure funds to buy the truck.
Mhm.
Um, when I left those prison walls, I had two different places that were safe with family that I could go and live. Um, and I'll say, as transparent as I can, now the mental health piece has not been the easiest piece because again, you are a different person. I went into prison as a 41-year-old man, so I was pretty much cemented in who I was going to be and who I am today. But that 6 years, 9 months of being that person and being exposed to that environment, to the
Mm-hmm.
things I saw, the things I heard, the things I experienced. Those are some really harsh empirical things that I can say changed me. At the core, I still am who I am, but it changed the way that I view the world, the way I view the criminal justice system, the way
Mhm.
I even view to some degree authority.
Mm.
It makes me rethink process, rethink the way that things that we're often socialized and taught, and we even reteach that the way the world is, that's what it is. The police are here to help us. They're here to serve our communities.
Mm.
Um, the criminal justice system, yeah, it may be flawed, but it's what we have. No, that's crap.
Yeah.
Because there's always room for improvement.
That brings me to a question that I've been wondering. So, you had mentioned how important addressing mental health is while you're in prison, and
Sure.
even once try to reentry and re-enter into society. There we go. Um, how do we do that when we have a system that's really based more on retribution and not necessarily on rehabilitation? Right?
Mm.
Like I feel like it's more of a, pay your debt to society as opposed to let me help you figure out what got you here and let me
Mm.
help you, take the steps to do something different. Our system doesn't seem to be built that way. So how do we address those things in the current system that we have?
Dr. West, if I knew how to address that system, I would probably have a seat
Be a millionaire.
at the right hand of God. But I have some suggestions, and the suggestions really deal a lot with people, with society, with understanding our history, and also understanding where we are as a people, as a society. And I'll quickly try and sum this up in that. When you think about what the criminal justice started for, it was, again, to address those issues in society, those bad apples,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. But then it then became this whole thing of policing, and it became about policing poor people, and particularly policing African Americans.
Mhm.
And when you think of the black codes and you think of loitering and all these things that were the result of policing that were strictly to ensnare African Americans and to get them into the criminal justice system. So they were locked up, and then they were even to some degree rented out. So re-enslaved through the criminal justice system.
Mhm.
So when you think about that happening, turn of the century America and how it has continued to happen, the criminal justice system has continued to be a place of punishment and not a place truly of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Um, therein lies the problem, and that the system itself must change, and it must be about the people that it is to help, or as they call themselves, the Department of Correction in a lot of
Mm.
states.
Right.
Wow.
what is correct about the way you do it.
Wow.
And so it makes me think about the Department of Incorrection, because the way that you're handling locking people up and putting them in a cage and giving them poor health care and not addressing the issues, there's no correction in that.
Mm.
It is what it is. So we've got to change the system that we currently have in place, and that means getting more people like yourselves, more people who are agents of change, who have a progressive mindset, to come up with these alternatives. And those alternatives have to be presented to our decision makers, but more importantly to our public, the people who are affected by it, the people who are affected by crime, the people who are affected by collateral damage, the people who are affected by mass incarceration. But the larger challenge in all that as well is that there's so many people who make money.
Mm-hmm.
People who make money off of warehousing people.
Yep.
Wow.
Who make so much money that they can influence laws, they can influence legislation, so they can influence they can make people stay in prison or in jail longer for something that was that didn't harm society, that was a victimless crime, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you fight the history of a corrupt system that now generates money for people who can make change? So it is a very serious fight.
Yeah.
We want you guys to stay with us on Dr. to Doctor in the chat room. We're going to break, and we will be right back in a moment with Dr. William Arnold on reentry after incarceration. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back on Dr. to Doctor in the chat room. We are here with Dr. William Arnold. I can't say it, man. And we're talking reentry after incarceration. Dr. West, you were talking on the break about something that you wanted to ask Dr. Arnold.
Yes. So earlier in the show, you had mentioned all of the things that happen outside of prison that you learn about happening as an inmate. So you had mentioned watching Ferguson and, probably, I was thinking about.
What about the George Floyd? Were you still incarcerated?
George Floyd happened, I think, about 2 months after.
Okay. So I was wondering, what is it? I mean, I know what that experience is like watching it for myself, but as an inmate, and for you specifically, as a wrongly accused and wrongly convicted inmate, what is it like to watch, police brutality when you are under police? I don't even know what you would call it, not care, because
Control.
There it is. Yes. How was that experience as an inmate watching all of the things that happen on the outside?
It was hard to process for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard, and I have to give I guess, sort of backstory, the historical reason why it was hard for me, because it was all that happened in 2014. All right. Mm-hmm. So at least Ferguson started in 2014. So just prior to that, let's say Barack Obama had entered his second term. I was working in diversity. Excuse me for a moment.
Yes, Dr. Arnold was giving us a little bit of his perspective, and he had a little bit of an interruption. So I think he's back with us.
Yeah.
On trying to get himself off of mute. When he's back, I do want to ask what his background is. It looks like maybe, did he write a book, Dr. Shaw?
I think he kind of mentioned it. There he is. He's back with us.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm. One of the downfalls of reentry is that you got to figure out technology. So y'all have to be patient.
Yeah.
To work through trying to get these mute buttons to work.
Yeah.
Right. But I was saying that I had actually become I bought into this idea that we were living in a post-racial world. And I feel like I have to apologize just to society, because as a Black man in America, I allowed myself to be hoodwinked, bamboozled. And
as my dad say, you drank the Kool-Aid, huh?
I really did to some degree. And I say that because I was working in diversity for the higher education, or for the Tennessee Board of Regents. I'm working in an environment where speaking about diversity, I'm reading about diversity, I'm learning about diversity, I'm doing diversity trainings, and I'm working with folks who were highly educated, if you will.
Mhm.
And so I didn't see that type of day-to-day racism because of the world in which I work. College educated, college focused people who were progressive in their thinking. And then when I went home, I was in my own world of my friends who mostly looked like me. So I would go home and go to church and go to my social settings, organizations, but they were all predominantly African American and segregated. So I was happy in that space. So going into prison, I was placed in a prison that didn't have a lot of African Americans. The gist of the folks who were guards were not very educated, had only experienced Black people of color.
Were not very educated.
Were not very educated.
Okay.
And had only experienced Black people via the images they had seen on television, or they had heard from their families, or what they had seen from those people they'd met in prison, or those people they'd had power over in prison. So here I come as this dark-skinned, I think
educated Black man,
educated, who in their thinking spoke the King's English. And I found out that racism is still very real. Bigotry is still very real. But being in that microcosm, that environment where I had these loud, aggressive white men, essentially, who, in the way that they spoke, in the way that they talked, even about their colleagues, didn't have respect, not just for people of color, but even for women, because they spoke about their female colleagues in a really horrible way in front of us as inmates. So to see that and to understand and to have that shocking moment, and then to see on television Black people being killed simply for living, Black people rioting because Black people are being killed simply for living, it was this culmination of, we still got a lot of work to do. You know, growing up in Memphis, you know, we all are tied to the legacy of what happened here in 1968. You know, we're still trying to heal from that. So in my mind, as someone who was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s and then became an adult in the 90s, I'm thinking that's gone. That's far from here. We don't have to riot. When we march symbolically and not transformationally. And so to realize that we still have to march, we still have to speak out, we still have to fight. The fight is not done. Really, it just, oh my gosh, it hit me in such a way because I couldn't at that time.
Yeah,
because of
that's
where
what
I
I
was
was going to ask, if it made you feel even more powerless in a world where you already had no power.
In some ways, but what it inspired me to do while on the inside was to not take unnecessary no's for an answer. And when I say that, I mean asking an employee or a guard, could I do something? Why can't I do that? And having them tell me that that's against policy. Tell me what the policy is. I'm gonna go to the library, look it up in a policy manual, or explain to me why that's that. Because, you know, at the time I was a trained administrator, so I understood procedures, understood vision, understood how policies affects things. So it was important for me to make certain that I knew the policy. It went back to just my job. I remember a supervisor once telling me, if you ever get fired for something, don't get fired for violating policy. Know the policy. You know the rules, you can play the game. So I was able to take it and to some degree try and empower other inmates by making certain they understood policies, or when they got upset or angry about something that went on in the prison, and it was a policy, and as an administrator, as a person who's been just come in from the free world, I can see what that means. So explaining it to them, walking them through it. First of all, educating myself on it so I won't fight the policy, but it was the thing about making certain that other folks knew how to fight this thing, how to file grievances, how to understand the difference in discrimination and not, understanding Title VI, that everything's not just a lawsuit, but you have to prove it, and you have to understand why it has to be fact-based and not based on your opinion. So that was one of the ways I was able to take power in this situation, and I was to try and change the people around me through my abilities of having been an investigator, having achieved all this education, if you will, but then just understanding procedures, practices, and being able to identify them so that, whether they go to another prison or they go to another unit, they at least have some sense of information and knowledge that they can use to perhaps affect someone else in a positive way.
Yeah. It reminds me of kind of how we talk to our young people about knowing your rights and knowing what, police can and can't ask or request for you to do. And if we don't know, they can completely take advantage of us.
But all at the same time, we have to teach them how to carry themselves and conduct themselves when they interact with the police, right, so that they can survive the interaction.
Yeah.
So catch-22, right?
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate lesson in passive aggressiveness.
Yeah.
What? Yes.
How can I get you to search yourself in terms of understanding what your rights are, but you're also dealing with this person who unfortunately has the right to take your life and the right to
who has permission to overlook your rights and Absolutely. Just do whatever. Absolutely. You made me think about when I first experienced my real blatant racism in the workplace. I was in my early 40s, and what made it so highlighted and what really made it stand out for me is a lot of what you said and how I grew up, because, we have classism as well. And my parents were very well known in my community. So a lot of things that maybe some of my friends or cousins or whatever would tell me they might have experienced it, I believed them, but it didn't touch my life, right? So I was like, I'm not lying. I'm being very open. Like, I had a really good life as a child. I wasn't like feeling like, oh, you're different. You're this Black girl, so you're not good enough. I didn't grow up like that, So, and then, I became older and I went into these other worlds, and nobody cared who my parents were and all of that, right? They just cared that my skin tone was brown and I did not measure up in their eyes. And so I experienced some really blatant racist things that really took an emotional toll on me because I wasn't accustomed to it, and probably had several things to go over my head prior to that incident, because I probably just didn't think it really existed on the level of, the civil rights movement or whatever. But like, these folks were like real life racists, right? Wow. And it's just crazy how, you can grow up with the same skin tone as everybody else, but it may take a minute before you actually experience what racism really feels like. It's very well alive.
And how we recognize it, as you said, can be a challenge, because if you're not used to it and you don't realize what a microaggression is, you don't realize that as a human, you have a right to exist and to not be judged by others. Or to have, as we would say, slick stuff said to you. Just since being home, I was at a restaurant with a friend, a female friend, and before eating, I just grabbed her hand and we prayed. And so later on, there was this older white couple next to us, and the older white man was like, "I saw what you did. I saw you prayed. That's so good. That's so good." And I took offense to it, because I don't need your
approval
to tell me that I'm civilized. I was raised in a Christian home. You get what I'm saying? So I'm not, I don't need you in my world to give me any validation. You get what I'm saying? And so it's those types of things that we have to deal with, that many times we don't realize, we don't understand.
Yeah.
We don't need a pat on the head as black.
Mhm. Mhm.
Get what I'm
Because
saying?
if you were a white man having lunch with a white woman, the question is, would he have said anything? Would he have thought anything that you prayed? But I can see you being, feeling like because I'm a black man, you're
Why did this stand out to you?
yes.
Or if
Yeah.
I had been a black man eating with a white woman, what would
Mm,
his thoughts have been? That I took a white woman's hand in mine and I prayed over her. So we have to be conscious of these things, because we don't step out and give people acknowledgments for doing the right thing. I think
right.
Chris Rock said it best, that you shouldn't get pat on the back for what you're supposed to do. So I don't need you to validate me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't need that. So yeah, sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No, no, no. I agree. One more thing before we go, because we know you're going to come back and talk to us again on next week. You were talking about being out with your friend for dinner, and that reminded me of something that you said on the last show that you did with us, and you talked about how when you're out, you look for cameras because you need to be able to prove where you were and what you were doing. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I always want to make certain that I'm able to document my moves, if it means through visual or letting someone know where I am. It's important, and I think it's important to all of us. I mean, and I would even make that suggestion to ladies from a
Mhm.
security standpoint. I'm more conscious now of just the setups of buildings. Like I never realized, I don't know if it's done because it's alphabetical or not, but normally when you go to use the public restroom, the men's room is first and the women's room is further away. And I
Oh,
found that intriguing, because I was thinking, wow,
I never noticed it.
that's a further walk for the woman from the actual place of where everyone is, which is a safer space.
Mhm.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I was like, you begin to, for me, it makes me hyper vigilant
mhm.
to issues of safety, issues of
Yeah.
personal safety, issues of personal security. And
Wow.
but yeah, I just want, so next time you're out, notice that
Like
the
I'm thinking about places that I frequent,
Me
Mhm.
too.
and like it is the case, and it's crazy. I never noticed.
I never knew that either.
Yeah,
Wow.
that the women's room is not first. Yeah.
Jeez.
I just started thinking about how you mentioned being hyper vigilant and just all the residual trauma that you experience that at this point is just maybe part of your everyday life and you probably don't even think about it. You don't, I imagine that when you go into a restaurant or something, you have to sit with your, facing the door. You can't sit with your back to the door. I mean, there are just all these adjustments that people make. That are really PTSD from being in prison, and nobody addresses it. They just send you on your way, and you're just supposed
Yeah.
to be, fine.
Yeah,
So,
I recently did some volunteer, or I attempted to do some volunteer work in Nashville. There was an event called Safe Surrender, and the whole premise of it was for people who had nonviolent warrant, who knowingly had nonviolent warrants, to be able to come in and surrender and get that taken care of, and get it adjudicated and actually go home that day. And so while I was there, I watched them. Them as in there were police there, quite a few police, which made me uncomfortable. Patting down people, searching them, still having.
you you went on mute, Dr. Arnold. Uh-oh.
You're
Again.
on, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What was the last thing you heard me say?
The police were patting people down.
Yeah, the police were patting people down, and so I still seeing that even in this safe surrender, if you will, people were still having to be treated like criminals.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so because I know that so many times I've been searched, strip searched,
Mhm.
uh, that was a trigger for me, and I
Yeah.
knew that it was time for me to leave.
Yeah.
And yeah. So you don't realize again how you've been traumatized by those experiences until you actually come into contact with with them again.
Yeah.
Wow.
So maybe we can talk more about that, but definitely next week, we want you to kind of break down those things that you talk, like those major things that people need, you know, when they are released from prison, and kind of break down what those things are and what it looks like. But we want you guys to come back next week and join us. Same chat channel, same chat time on the station that comes to you. We will see you guys on next week on 94.7 FM. See you, Dr. West.
Bye-bye.